What truly happens when loyalty collides with destiny on a tower high above the sleeping castle? The air bites with cold, torches flicker against stone, and somewhere in the dark, two minds sharpen like blades. You probably won't survive this, but you'll understand it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious. From which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the base of the astronomy tower, and the stones are older than most countries' constitutions. Certainly older than the 1776 Declaration that created the American experiment in democracy, which feels almost quaint compared to Hogwarts' Millennium of Secrets. The spiral stairs wind upward like a question mark carved in granite, and you take them two at a time because somewhere above, Remus Lupin waits in that specific kind of solitude that only people who transform into wolves once a month truly understand. The scholarly debate about whether lycanthropy is a curse, a disease, or a genetic mutation has raged in magical medical journals for centuries. But right now, on this particular November evening in 1996, it's just a man trying to figure out if he's allowed to be happy. You pass a window and glimpse the forbidden forest below, dark as spilled ink, and you remember that medieval monks used to illuminate manuscripts by candlelight in conditions not much better than this. Talk about eye strain. Remus stands at the top landing, his robes catching the wind like he's auditioning for a very melancholy perfume commercial. And when he turns to acknowledge your approach, his smile is the kind that apologizes for existing. Bad timing, you ask, though you already know the answer. Always, he says, and it's supposed to be a joke, but it lands with the weight of someone who's spent 37 years believing it. The fringe historians of magical maladies sometimes reference a 14th century Polish wizard who supposedly cured his own lycanthropy by sheer spite and a diet of only purple foods, but no one's ever replicated the results, which honestly sounds about right for most miracle cures. You settle against the cold parapet beside him, and the silence stretches out comfortable and sad in equal measure, which is basically Remus Lupin's entire aesthetic if you had to summarize it for a dating profile. Enjoys long walks, teaching defense against the dark arts, and crushing his own dreams before breakfast. The moon is 3 days from full, which means his bones already ache in that preliminary way, the warning tremors before the earthquake, and you can see it in how he holds his shoulders, braced against a future he can't prevent. In 1692, 5 people were hanged in Salem for witchcraft, a piece of Muggle history that wizards often reference as proof of why secrecy matters. But it's also a reminder that fear makes people monstrous in ways no curse ever could. She's coming, Remus says quietly, and he doesn't specify who because he hasn't talked about anything else to anyone who listened for the past 4 months, which narrows it down considerably. You nod, watching the stairs, and sure enough, you hear the footsteps, quicker than yours were, taking the steps with the kind of determination usually reserved for people storming castles or returning library books catastrophically overdue. Nymphadora Tonks emerges onto the tower landing, and the first thing you notice is her hair. Mousy brown, limp, the color of giving up. For a metamorph magus, someone who can shift their appearance as easily as you might change shirts, choosing brown is basically a white flag of emotional surrender. Your hair looks very natural, you offer, which is possibly the worst compliment in the history of compliments. Right up there with, you have a very symmetrical face for someone with your personality. Tonks shoots you a look that could curdle potions. Thanks. I'm going for defeated horror chic, she says, deadpan. The debate among magical scholars about whether metamorph magus abilities are purely mental or require some physical anchor in the body remains unsettled, though most agree that emotional state affects the gift profoundly, which certainly tracks with what you're witnessing. There's a peculiar historical footnote about a Victorian-era metamorph magus who accidentally got stuck as a hedge for 3 weeks after a particularly bad breakup, though the sources are questionable at best. Remus won't meet her eyes, which is impressive conflict avoidance considering they're standing approximately 4 feet apart on a relatively small tower platform. Emotionally, he might as well be in Romania. You watch as Tonks crosses her arms, and even in the torchlight, you can see the dark circles under her eyes, the kind that speak of too many night shifts hunting Death Eaters, and too many nights afterward lying awake replaying conversations that went wrong. "We need to talk," she says, which is universally understood in every language and culture as code for "buckle up, this is going to hurt," right up there with "it's not you, it's me," and "we should stay friends," in the pantheon of phrases that mean the opposite of comfort. Remus runs a hand through his graying hair, and yes, he's only 37, but lycanthropy ages you faster than normal, faster than fair, faster than anyone should have to endure. "I've said everything I have to say, Tonks," he replies. Using her surname like formality might create distance, might build walls high enough to protect her from him, which is fundamentally stupid, but also heartbreaking in that specific way that noble self-sacrifice usually is. "You've said a lot of things," Tonks counters, and her voice has the sharp edge of someone who's done being patient, done being understanding, done letting someone else decide what's best for her, like she's a child instead of a trained auror who fights dark wizards for a living. "You've said you're too old, too poor, too dangerous. Honestly, if you added too tall and too handsome, we'd have a full set of ridiculous excuses." That's joke number 1, and it lands with enough bite that Remus actually flinches. You lean against the stone wall, feeling very much like a third wheel, though neither of them has asked you to leave, probably because you're narratively necessary, and also because misery loves company, witnesses, and someone to validate that yes, this conversation is as painful as it feels. The historical record shows that in 1348, the Black Death killed roughly 1/3 of Europe's population, which wizards were not immune to despite what some optimistic medieval accounts claimed. And sometimes you wonder if Remus sees his lycanthropy through that same lens. Something infectious, something that destroys everything it touches, something to be quarantined away from the people who matter. "I'm a werewolf," Remus says, like this is new information, like Tonks hasn't known this from the beginning, like it's a revelation instead of a tired refrain. "And I'm a metamorph magus who's currently stuck looking like a depressed librarian, so we've all got our problems," Tonks shoots back. And that's joke number 2, self-deprecating and sharp. The fringe theory that lycanthropy could be managed with wolfsbane potion was considered radical nonsense until Damocles Belby invented it in the 1990s, proving that sometimes the fringe becomes mainstream. But Remus grew up in an era when no such hope existed, and old fears have deep roots. "You deserve someone who can give you a normal life," Remus continues, and his voice cracks just slightly on the word normal, which he's never been, never had, never will experience, no matter how long he lives. "Scholars have debated for generations whether destiny is fixed or flexible," you interject quietly, because someone needs to say something before this turns into a full retreat. "And you're both acting like the conclusion's already written." Tonks glances at you, then back at Remus. "I don't want normal," she says, and each word is deliberate, carved out of something harder than want, something closer to conviction. "I want you, you self-sacrificing idiot. That's joke number 3, though it's wrapped in so much frustration and longing that it barely qualifies as humor, more like a truth that would hurt too much without the slight buffer of insult. Remus looks at her finally, really looks, and you can see the war happening behind his eyes. The part of him that wants to reach for her, and the part that's spent a lifetime believing he's not allowed to have good things, beautiful things, things that might look at him in moonlight and not run away. The tower feels smaller suddenly, the air thicker, and you're aware that you're watching something tip on a very delicate scale. The kind of moment where everything changes or nothing does, where courage either shows up or stays home claiming it had other plans. Tonks takes a step closer, and Remus takes a step back. And it's like watching a sad dance where only one person knows the steps and the other is desperately trying to leave the floor entirely. Every full moon, I become a monster, Remus says, and his voice is quiet but firm, like he's explaining basic arithmetic. 2 + 2 =, you should run away from me. Dumbledore trusts you to teach children, Tonks counters. Mad Eye trusts you to fight Death Eaters. The Order trusts you to go underground with the werewolf packs. But you don't trust yourself to be loved. It's the kind of question that doesn't really expect an answer because the answer is obvious and devastating. You watch the torches flicker, casting wild shadows across the stone, and you think about how in 1431, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake largely because she made powerful men uncomfortable by refusing to stay in the box they'd built for her. History is full of people punished for being inconveniently extraordinary. It's not about trust, Remus begins, but Tonks cuts him off with a sharp laugh that has zero humor in it. Then what? You think I don't know what I'm signing up for? I'm an Auror, Remus. I've faced Bellatrix Lestrange in combat. I've seen what real monsters look like, and spoiler alert, she gestures at him. You're not it. The wind picks up, carrying the smell of approaching winter, that specific scent of cold earth and dying leaves that means the year is turning over, giving up, getting ready to sleep. What if I hurt you? Remus asks. And it's the real question. The one underneath all the others. The fear that keeps him awake during the days after full moons when he pieces together his movements from evidence and prayer. What if you don't? Tonks replies. What if we have years together? What if we have a family? What if the worst thing that happens is we're happy until we're not, which is literally the deal everyone gets, werewolf or not? There's a peculiar footnote in Magical Maladies and Their Hereditary Patterns by Hippocrates Smethwick that suggests lycanthropy's transmission to offspring is far less certain than commonly believed, with only a 12% occurrence rate in recorded cases, though the data is admittedly incomplete, and the subject of ongoing debate among medical professionals who can't even agree on whether it's technically a curse or a condition. You clear your throat. In case anyone's wondering, this is either the most romantic or most depressing conversation I've ever witnessed, and I once watched a ghost try to ask out a portrait, so the bar was already pretty low. That earns you a small smile from Tonks, which feels like a victory. Remus, predictably, still looks like he's attending his own funeral. There's something else, Tonks says, and her voice shifts, becomes quieter, more serious, which is saying something given the general seriousness of confessing love to a self-loathing werewolf on a freezing tower at night. She reaches into her robes and pulls out a small book, leather-bound, old enough that the spine cracks when she opens it. I've been researching, she says, because that's what you do when someone you love insists they're too cursed to be with you. You hit the library like a particularly determined Hermione Granger, minus the time turner and plus a lot of swearing. The book's pages are filled with cramped handwriting, diagrams, notes in multiple languages, There are binding spells, Tonks continues. Old ones, from before the ministry regulated everything, from when magic was about intent and will instead of paperwork and permits. She looks up at Remus, and in the torchlight her eyes are bright, fierce, determined. Vows that two people can make to each other, witnessed by magic itself instead of some bureaucrat with a quill. Remus stares at the book like it might bite him. Tonks, Nymphadora, she interrupts. If you're going to reject a marriage proposal, at least use my first name. And that's how you learn that what you thought was a conversation is actually a proposal, which honestly you should have seen coming but somehow didn't, because your narrative awareness is apparently taking the night off. The word marriage hangs in the air like a spell someone cast but forgot to finish, and Remus looks genuinely panicked now, which is quite a feat for a man who regularly throws himself into life-threatening situations with barely a flinch. Apparently, mortal danger is fine, but commitment is where he draws the line. You can't be serious, he says, and his voice has gone up half an octave, which would be funny if it weren't so painfully sincere. I'm desperately serious, Tonks replies. I'm so serious, I've spent 3 weeks reading books that made magical hieroglyphs and logograms look like light beach reading. Do you know how boring magical contract law from the 1400s is? It's oppressively boring. I did that for you. You edge slightly closer to see the book, and sure enough, the pages detail something called the vinculum animarum, which your rusty Latin translates roughly to bond of souls. And it looks complicated in the way that all-powerful magic is complicated. Lots of specific timing and intent and ceremonial components that can't be substituted with whatever's convenient. This is ancient magic, Remus says, which is his professor voice, the one he uses when he's retreating into academic analysis to avoid feelings, a classic move. It's unregulated by the ministry. Scholars debate whether these vows even hold legal standing in modern wizarding society. There it is. The scholarly debate reference, right on schedule. I don't care about legal standing, Tonks says flatly. I care about you. I care about us. I care about making a promise that means something deeper than a piece of parchment filed in some ministry basement. The historical record of magical marriages is fascinating and messy. The ministry only started requiring formal registration in 1723, after a scandal involving a wizard who apparently married 14 different people in 12 different counties, which created inheritance chaos that took decades to sort out. Before that, marriages were recognized by community acknowledgement, magical oath, or simple cohabitation, much like common law marriages in the Muggle world. The moon is 3 days from full, you observe, because someone should probably mention the timing issue. Is that a problem for this kind of spell? Tonks flips to a marked page. Actually, it's ideal. The older traditions held that vows made in the shadow of the full moon, for someone afflicted by lunar magic, carry more weight. Something about sympathetic resonance. She's clearly memorized this, practiced this presentation, prepared for his objections like she's going before the Wizengamot instead of proposing to the man she loves on a freezing tower. You could do better. Remus tries one more time, and it's almost funny how he's cycling through objections like someone flipping through a Rolodex of reasons to be miserable. Better than a decorated war hero who's brilliant at defense against the dark arts, kind to students, loyal to a fault, and looks unfairly good in shabby robes. Yeah, the queue of better options is really stretched around the block, Tonks says, and the sarcasm is so thick you could cut it with a silver knife, which would be an inappropriate werewolf joke, so you keep it to yourself. That's joke number 1 for this section, and it lands with enough force that Remus actually almost smiles, which is progress with a capital P. Walk me through it. Remus says finally. And it's not agreement, but it's not refusal either. It's the space in between where possibility lives. Tonks's face lights up. Literally, her hair flickers with just a hint of pink at the tips. The first color you've seen in it all evening. Like hope is returning in small, cautious degrees. She explains that the vinculum animarum requires both parties to speak their vows aloud, barefoot on bare earth or stone, under open sky. No witness is necessary, though not forbidden. The words must be their own, from genuine intent, and sealed with clasped hands and a drop of blood from each person, mingled together. Very vampire romantic, you mutter. I think you mean gothic romantic, Tonks corrects. Vampires are a whole different subset of problematic relationships. That's joke number 2, and it breaks some of the tension. Remus is reading the book now, his finger tracing the lines of text, and you can see his brilliant, analytical mind working through the magic, the implications, the risks. There's a peculiar account in Obscure Magical Practices of the Hebrides about a fishing village where every marriage for 200 years was performed via a variant of this vow. And the community reported unusually low rates of magical separation, though correlation is not causation, and the sample size is admittedly small. If we do this, Remus says slowly, there's no guarantee it will protect you from me. No guarantee I won't still be dangerous. Still be the man I love, Tonks finishes. Yeah, that's kind of the point of marriage, Remus. You don't vow yourself to someone on their best day and then bail when it gets complicated. You show up anyway. The wind is really howling now, whipping Tonks' brown hair around her face, and Remus's robes are billowing like he's in a very melancholy music video. When would we do this? He asks, and you realize with a start that he's actually considering it, actually weighing this impossible, beautiful, terrifying possibility. Now, Tonks says simply, tonight, right here. And your role in this story suddenly becomes very clear. You're the witness to something that doesn't require witnesses, the observer of a moment so private and so profound that being allowed to watch it feels like an honor you're not sure you've earned. Remus removes his shoes slowly, like a man approaching a precipice, and then his socks, which is somehow more vulnerable than anything else so far. There's something deeply intimate about bare feet on cold stone, about choosing discomfort for the sake of ritual. Tonks kicks off her boots with significantly less ceremony, and her feet must be freezing against the November chill radiating from the tower floor. But she doesn't flinch, doesn't hesitate. I should probably give you 2 privacy, you say, but neither of them acknowledges the suggestion. So you stay, rooted to your spot against the parapet, feeling like you've stumbled into something sacred. The book lies open on the stone between them, pages fluttering in the wind, and Tonks has to place a rock on it to keep it from flying away, which is possibly the least romantic detail of a highly romantic moment. But that's real life for you. Grand gestures always come with mundane logistics. You go first, Remus says, and Tonks nods, reaching out to take his hands. Her fingers are slender, and his are scarred, and where they join looks like a study in contrasts, in everything that should divide them, but somehow doesn't. She takes a breath, and when she speaks, her voice is steady. I, Nymphadora Tonks, vow myself to you, Remus Lupin, in full knowledge of who and what you are. I vow to stand beside you in moonlight and in shadow, in peace and in war, in the moments when you love yourself and in the moments when you don't. It's not traditional wedding language. There's no "till death do us part," no mention of sickness and health, though both are implied in ways that standard vows never quite capture. I vow to be your partner, your equal, your home when the world is hostile, and your truth when fear lies to you. I vow this with clear eyes and full heart, bound by magic older than ministry law, deeper than paper, stronger than doubt. The air around them shimmers, just slightly like heat rising from summer pavement, and you realize the magic is already responding, already listening. In 1215, the Magna Carta was sealed, establishing the principle that even kings were subject to law. And here on this tower, two people are establishing that love can be its own law, its own sovereignty, independent of institutional approval. Remus is staring at their joined hands, and you can see him wrestling with a lifetime of self-denial, a lifetime of being told, by circumstances, by society, by his own internalized hatred, that this isn't for him, can't be for him, shouldn't even be dreamed about. Your turn, Tonks says softly, and it's an invitation, not a demand. He could still walk away. The vow isn't sealed until both parties speak and the blood is shared. He could still choose the familiar pain of isolation over the terrifying vulnerability of being loved. But he doesn't. I, Remus Lupin, he begins, and his voice is rough. Vow myself to you, Nymphadora Tonks, though I cannot promise I'm worthy of the gift. Tonks squeezes his hands, hard, like she's physically pushing encouragement into him. I vow to try, he continues, to try to be the man you see when you look at me, even when I can't see him myself. I vow to protect you, to trust you, to let you love me even when everything I've learned says I should push you away. The shimmer in the air intensifies, and now you can definitely see it, a faint golden light that seems to emanate from where their hands clasp. I vow to give you my truth, my loyalty, my best self in every form I take, monster or man. I vow this knowing I bring danger to your door, damage to your life, and you stand here anyway. His voice breaks on the last word. I vow to be worthy of that courage, or die trying. It's the most words you've heard Remus string together about his own worthiness, his own future, without immediately undermining them, and it costs him something to say them. You can see it in the tightness around his eyes, the rigid set of his shoulders. Now the blood, Tonks says, and she produces a small silver pin from her pocket, because apparently she came prepared for impromptu magical marriage, which is very on brand for an auror. She pricks her thumb, efficient and quick, and a single drop of blood wells up, dark in the torchlight. Remus takes the pin, hesitates. What if my blood is, if you say tainted, I'm going to push you off this tower and marry your ghost instead, Tonks interrupts, and that's joke number 3, delivered with enough edge that Remus actually huffs a small laugh. He pricks his own thumb. The debate among magical medical researchers about whether lycanthropy is blood-borne or curse-transferred remains contentious, with evidence supporting both transmission vectors depending on how the original affliction occurred. But the consensus is that blood itself isn't inherently infectious outside the context of a bite during transformation. They press their thumbs together, blood mingling, and the golden shimmer explodes into something brighter, warmer, a light that wraps around them both like an embrace, like acceptance, like magic saying, yes, we recognize this, we seal this, we honor this. You have to look away because it's almost too bright, too intimate, like staring directly into someone else's hope. When the light fades, they're still standing there, barefoot on cold stone, hands clasped, and something fundamental has shifted. You can't name it exactly, but you feel it the way you feel the temperature drop before rain, the way you know instinctively that a room has changed even when nothing visible has moved. They stand there for a long moment, just breathing, and you're acutely aware that you've just witnessed something that maybe 7 people in the last century have seen. A marriage rite so old that the ministry doesn't even have forms for it, which is saying something because the ministry has forms for literally everything, including accidental teacup transformation, domestic. So, Tonks says finally, I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. She's not actually talking to you, obviously. She's making a joke to break the tension, pretending there's an audience to this private moment, which is actually kind of meta and hilarious given that you're narratively watching this. That's joke number 1. And it works because Remus actually laughs. A real laugh, startled out of him. Did you just break the 4th wall at our wedding? He asks. And there's something lighter in his voice. Something that wasn't there before. Our wedding, Tonks repeats, testing the words. That's going to take some getting used to. Hi, I'm Nymphadora Lupin. No wait, that sounds like a disease. Tonks Lupin? Lupin Tonks? You don't have to change your name, Remus says quickly. I know I don't have to, Tonks replies. But I might want to. Or we could both change our names to something completely different. Mr. and Mrs. Stardust, Professor and Auror Moonbeam. Please no, Remus says. And that's joke number 2, wrapped in the mundane absurdity that follows even the most profound magical moments. Someone still has to figure out the paperwork, the logistics, the question of what to tell people. We should go inside, you suggest, because they're both still barefoot and the temperature is dropping toward frost. You're going to lose toes to frostbite, and that's a terrible way to start a marriage. They gather their shoes, and Tonks carefully picks up the book, tucking it back into her robes like the treasure it is. As you all head toward the stairs, Remus suddenly stops. We can't tell anyone, he says. Not yet. The order, the ministry, it would raise too many questions, create too many complications. Tonks considers this. So we're secretly married. That's very spy novel of us. Everything's very spy novel these days, you mutter. Which is fair because there's a war on, and Voldemort is actively trying to take over the government. So secret marriages are honestly low on the list of clandestine activities currently happening. The tradition of secret marriages has a long history. In 1772, the Royal Marriages Act in England required members of the royal family to obtain the monarch's permission to marry, leading to several secret ceremonies that were later contested in court, proving that even Muggles understood sometimes love has to operate underground. As you descend the spiral stairs, you notice that Tonks's hair is slowly shifting back toward pink, just at the roots, like color returning to a landscape after winter. Small changes, but significant. We'll need a story, Remus says, his professor brain already working the problem, for why your Patronus changed. Because that's the thing about Tonks's Patronus that everyone in the Order has noticed. It changed to a wolf, which is about as subtle as a neon sign reading, "I'm in love with the werewolf," and has been the subject of much speculation and carefully avoided conversations. I'll say I've been working through some personal issues and it shifted back, Tonks says, which is technically true. My personal issue was that the man I loved was being a noble idiot, and I've resolved it by marrying him without his permission. You had my permission, Remus protests. Eventually, after arguing about it on a freezing tower like reasonable adults. That's joke number 3. You reach the bottom of the stairs, and the corridor stretches out toward the inhabited parts of the castle. Warm and lit and full of people who don't know what just happened above their heads. There's a peculiar reference in Traditions of Hand Fasting in Magical Communities about a practice in 18th century Scotland where couples would marry themselves in private, then simply begin referring to each other as spouses, and the community would accept it as fact. No ceremony, no witnesses, just the declaration and the living of it. Do you feel different? Tonks asks quietly. Remus considers the question with his characteristic seriousness. Yes, he says finally. And no, I feel less alone, which is different. Terrifying, but different. Good terrifying or bad terrifying? I'm not sure there's a difference anymore, Remus admits, and it's perhaps the most honest thing he's said all night. The ongoing scholarly debate about whether magical vows have physiological effects or purely symbolic weight has never been conclusively settled, though several studies suggest that intent-based magic can create measurable changes in magical signature, which might explain the lingering warmth you can still see in the air around them, like they're standing in slightly different light than the rest of the world. The weeks that follow are a study in contrasts, in secret smiles across order meetings, and the careful maintenance of separate residences for appearance's sake. And you watch it unfold like a story told in margins and footnotes, the real narrative hidden beneath the official version. They're good at secrecy, both of them. Remus from a lifetime of hiding his condition, Tonks from her aura training. But there are tells if you know where to look. The way Tonks's Patronus is suddenly solid and steady again, a bright wolf that bounds through the air with joy instead of the misty, half-formed thing it had been for months. The way Remus takes his tea now with 2 sugars instead of 1, because that's how Tonks takes hers, and habits bleed together when you're sharing breakfasts in secret. The way they stand just slightly closer than before in group settings, not touching but orbiting, 2 planets caught in each other's gravity. You're being obvious, you tell Tonks one afternoon when you catch her smiling at nothing, or rather at the letter she's tucked in her pocket. The 3rd one this week. Am not, she says, which is a blatant lie. You're literally glowing. I think it's a metamorph magus thing, but you're actually emitting a faint rosy light. That's joke number 1, and only slightly an exaggeration. She does look different, healthier, happier, more settled in her own skin in a way she hadn't been since Sirius died, and everything went dark. Can't a woman be happy about effective aura work? Tonks asks innocently. Sure, you agree. But usually, effective aura work doesn't make you doodle little wolves in the margins of incident reports. She glances down at her parchment and has the grace to look embarrassed. The letters are their compromise. They can't be together as openly as they'd like. Can't share an address or make their marriage public while Remus is embedded with the werewolf packs, gathering intelligence and trying to sway Fenrir Greyback's followers away from Voldemort's influence. It's dangerous work, the kind that requires Remus to disappear for weeks at a time into communities that view him with suspicion for his association with Dumbledore, and with tentative acceptance for his shared affliction. During the French Revolution in the 1790s, the Committee of Public Safety employed a vast network of secret correspondence to coordinate revolutionary activities, proving that even in the most chaotic times, or perhaps especially then, people find ways to communicate what matters. The letters between Remus and Tonks are never signed, never explicitly romantic in case they're intercepted, but they're love letters nonetheless, disguised as mundane updates. You've seen a few that Tonks left carelessly out, and they read like, "The weather in the north is cold but manageable. I've made contact with the Grey faction and they're willing to talk. I think of warm evenings and pink sunsets often, which is Remus speak for I miss you and your pink hair and I'm not dead yet." Tonks's replies are more direct, barely coded. Patrols are routine. Saw a full moon last night and thought of you, obviously. Come home safe or I'll track you down and drag you back myself. The scholarly debate about the effectiveness of the werewolf integration strategy remains heated in ministry circles. with some arguing that Remus's efforts are vital intelligence gathering, and others insisting that werewolves are irredeemable, dark creatures who should be contained rather than courted, which tells you a lot about the Ministry's general attitude toward anything they fear. Winter deepens into the coldest January in 40 years, and you're at Grimold Place when Tonks comes through the flue looking pale and determined and slightly ill. "You all right?" you ask, because she's usually graceful even when she's tripping over things as a bit. But right now she looks genuinely unsteady. "Fine," she says shortly, which is code for, "Absolutely not fine, but I'm not ready to talk about it." She makes it 3 steps toward the kitchen before she has to sit down abruptly on the stairs. That's when you notice the slight tremor in her hands, the way she's breathing carefully through her nose like she's fighting nausea. "When's the last time you ate?" You try. "Not a food thing," Tonks says. She's quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm pregnant." The words land in the dusty hallway like a bombshell, like a miracle, like a catastrophe, depending on your perspective and the current political climate, and about 17 other factors. "Does Remus know?" you ask carefully. "Not yet," Tonks says. "He's not due back for another week, and I'm not sending this via owl post." "Dear husband, surprise, you're going to be a father. Hope the werewolf pack recruitment is going well. Love and vomit, Tonks." That's joke number 2, but it's strained. You sit down beside her on the stairs. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified," Tonks admits. "Excited. Terrified." Did I mention terrified? The statistics on magical pregnancies affected by lycanthropic influence are scarce and contradictory. Most research was conducted in eras when werewolves were so stigmatized that few cases were documented openly, and those that were came with heavy bias. The fringe theory that werewolf children are born during full moons and emerge with fangs has been thoroughly debunked, but it persists in popular imagination because fear is stickier than facts. Remus returns to Grimold Place on a Tuesday that feels like any other Tuesday, right up until the moment Tonks tells him the news, and you're unfortunately present for it. Because the universe has decided you're the unofficial witness to every major moment in their relationship, which is either an honor or a curse. You haven't decided which. He comes through the door tired and thinner, with new scars on his hands and exhaustion carved into the lines of his face, and Tonks takes one look at him and bursts into tears, which is extremely unlike her, and immediately sets off alarm bells for everyone in the room. "What happened?" Remus demands, crossing to her in 3 strides, hands hovering over her shoulders like he's afraid to touch her, afraid he'll make it worse. "Are you hurt? Is it the Ministry? Did Greyback—" "I'm pregnant," Tonks blurts out, and Remus goes absolutely still. The kind of still that happens when every thought process stops simultaneously, when the brain simply cannot compute the information it's receiving. You very carefully inch toward the door, because this feels like a conversation that doesn't need an audience. But Tonks shoots you a look that clearly says, "Stay put, I need backup." So you stay, plastered against the wall like awkward wallpaper. Remus starts and doesn't finish the sentence, possibly because he's forgotten how words work. "Pregnant," Tonks confirms, "with a baby, our baby, due sometime in late summer apparently, though the healer wasn't entirely certain because magical pregnancies are sometimes difficult to date, and also I haven't exactly been regular about anything lately given the stress and the war and the secret marriage." She's babbling now, nervous, and you watch Remus's face cycle through about 15 different emotions in as many seconds. Shock, joy, terror, something that might be wonder, and then back to terror, which seems to be winning. "I can't," he says. "We can't." "We are," Tonks interrupts. "It's happening, already happening." Baby Lupin is currently about the size of a bean and making me want to throw up every morning. So like it or not, this is our reality. Remus sits down hard in the nearest chair, which happens to be the terrible Victorian monstrosity that's been in the Black family for generations, and is about as comfortable as sitting on a pile of reproachful ancestors. What if, he begins, and you can see him spiraling, falling into every worst-case scenario his brilliant, anxious mind can conjure. What if the baby is... What if I've passed on? What if every full moon? What if the baby is healthy and perfect and loved beyond measure? Tonks counters, kneeling in front of him, taking his hands. What if we're good parents? What if this is hard but we do it anyway? The historical precedent for lycanthropic inheritance is actually more reassuring than the folklore suggests. A comprehensive study published in 1978 by the International Magical Medical Association found that only 8 to 12% of children born to werewolf parents showed any lycanthropic traits, and even then, usually not full transformation, though the study is contested by more conservative researchers who question the methodology. I can't do this, Remus says, and his voice is breaking. I can't bring a child into this world, into this war, with my condition, with the danger. You're not doing it alone, Tonks says firmly, and you don't get to make this decision unilaterally. I'm already pregnant, Remus. The question isn't whether we're having a baby. The question is whether you're going to be there for it. It's harsh, but necessary, and you see it land. Remus looks at her, really looks, and you can see him seeing not just the fear, but the hope, the stubborn determination that made her propose to him on a tower, that made her chase him down when he tried to push her away. I'm terrified, he whispers. Welcome to parenthood, Tonks says. I'm told it's mostly terror with occasional breaks for joy and a lot of really disgusting diaper situations. That's joke number 1 for this section, and it's gentle, softening the moment. What if I'm a terrible father? Remus asks, and it's the real question, the one underneath all the others. My own father, the burden he carried, having a son like me. Your father loved you, Tonks says, and you'll love this baby. That's the starting point. We'll figure out the rest as we go. The scholarly debate about nature versus nurture in magical child development has raged for centuries, with no clear consensus except that love and stable environment seem to matter more than almost any other factor, including blood status, magical strength, or parental afflictions. But here's where the story tips, where fear meets courage and courage doesn't win cleanly but wins anyway, messy and uncertain. Remus doesn't immediately embrace the pregnancy with joy. That would be a lie, and this story doesn't traffic in easy answers. Instead, he panics, properly panics. He leaves Grimold Place that same night, doesn't tell anyone where he's going, just vanishes into the war-torn, wizarding world like he's done so many times before when things get too real, too close, too emotionally demanding. Tonks is furious and heartbroken in equal measure, and you sit with her in the kitchen while she alternates between crying and plotting murder, which is apparently the emotional range of pregnancy combined with abandonment. He'll come back, you offer, though you're not entirely sure. He'd better, Tonks says darkly, or I'm hunting him down and hexing him into next Tuesday. That's joke number 1, except she's serious enough that you're not entirely convinced it's a joke. Days pass, then weeks. Tonks goes on patrols, does her job, grows a tiny bit rounder in the middle, though she hides it with loose robes and clever metamorph magus adjustments. The Order tiptoes around her because a heartbroken, pregnant Auror is not someone you want to cross, and Mad Eye actually goes easier on her in training, which tells you how worried everyone is. You don't know where Remus is, and apparently neither does Dumbledore, which is concerning given that Dumbledore usually knows everything except how to be straightforward about important information, which is his one consistent character flaw. The winter of 1798 was so harsh that the Thames froze solid and Londoners held a frost fair on the ice, which is a peculiar historical detail, but somehow feels relevant to this moment of frozen waiting, of life suspended in cold uncertainty. Then, 6 weeks after he left, Remus shows up at Harry Potter's door, and what happens there you only hear about secondhand. How he tried to join Harry on the Horcrux hunt, tried to abandon Tonks and the baby under the guise of being useful to the war effort, and how Harry, 17 years old and with no patience for adults being idiots, essentially told him to go home and be a father. You're at Grimmauld Place when Remus returns, looking worse than when he left, thinner, more haunted, but also somehow lighter, like he set down a weight he's been carrying since before you knew him. Tonks hears him come in and freezes in the kitchen doorway, and the silence stretches out dangerous and fragile. "I'm sorry," Remus says, and his voice is wrecked. "I'm so sorry. I am terrified, and I ran, and that was unforgivable." "You're right, it was," Tonks says coldly. "But then, are you staying?" "If you'll have me," Remus says. I don't care what you think you deserve," Tonks interrupts. "I care whether you're going to be here. For me. For this baby. Even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared." "Yes," Remus says simply. "I'm here. I'm staying. I promise." And maybe it's the vow they made on the tower, the magic still binding them. Or maybe it's just the man finally catching up to the courage his wife has been showing all along. But you believe him. So does Tonks, apparently, because she crosses the room and hugs him hard enough that he makes a small oof sound. And then she's crying again, and he's apologizing, and you slip out to give them actual privacy this time. The following months are better, not perfect, because war doesn't allow for perfect, but better. Remus throws himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same intense focus he brings to everything. Reading every book on magical child-rearing, baby-proofing, Grimmauld Place to an almost obsessive degree, practicing healing charms for minor injuries. He levitated a cabbage around the kitchen for an hour yesterday, Tonks tells you, pretending it was a baby. I didn't have the heart to tell him that babies are significantly less round and more screamy than cabbages. That's joke number 2, and she tells it with such fondness that you know things are actually okay. Or as okay as they can be when Voldemort controls the Ministry and the world is ending in slow motion. Teddy Lupin is born in April, during a brief window of peace between Death Eater raids, and he comes into the world with a tuft of bright turquoise hair and lungs that could wake the dead, which is frankly appropriate given the circumstances. You visit the safe house where they're staying, warded to hell and back, and find Remus holding his son with the kind of terrified reverence usually reserved for handling ancient magical artifacts that might explode. "He's perfect," Remus whispers, and you've never heard such wonder in his voice. "He's got your nose," Tonks says from the bed, exhausted and radiant. Poor kid. That's joke number 3. The fringe magical theory that Metamorph Magus abilities can skip generations but often appear in times of emotional significance is supported by Teddy's hair color changes, which cycle through the rainbow whenever he experiences strong feelings, which is constantly because he's a newborn, and everything is a strong feeling when you're new to existence. "What does this mean for the full moon?" you ask quietly, because someone has to. "We don't know yet," Remus admits. "We won't know until he's older, but whatever happens, we'll handle it. Together." The scholarly debate continues. And now the story begins to fold itself away, like a letter being tucked into an envelope. like a spell winding down to its natural conclusion, and you feel yourself drifting, settling, the way you do when a tale finds its ending, even though the lives within it continue beyond the words. The battle comes, as battles do in wartime, inevitable as seasons, and Remus and Tonks fight at Hogwarts on that terrible May night when the castle itself seems to scream, and they don't survive it, which is the tragedy that underscores everything, the shadow that was always waiting. But before that, in the space between Teddy's birth and their deaths, in those few precious weeks, they were happy, and that matters. And Teddy grows up knowing he was loved, that his parents chose each other and chose him, even when the world said they shouldn't, even when fear said to run. You let yourself imagine them as they were on that tower, barefoot on stone, making promises by moonlight, and the image softens at the edges, becomes gauzy with sleep and distance. The torches flicker lower. The wind dies down to a whisper. Somewhere a baby laughs, bright as turquoise hair, and somewhere a wolf runs free under stars that remember every vow ever spoken to them. And you're so tired now, so ready to let the story rest. The stone is warm somehow, despite the November cold, and your eyes are heavy, and the last thing you hear before you slip into dreams is the sound of two people breathing in sync, in rhythm, in the peaceful silence of promises kept and futures hoped for. And the world is vast and small all at once. And you are safe here. You are held. You are drifting down into soft darkness where stories live forever and love doesn't end just because the words do. And sleep takes you gentle as moonlight, quiet as a secret vow, and everything fades to warm and welcome nothing at all.